Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Sermon with Hyde Park United Methodist Church in Tampa, Florida. I'm Matt Hotho.
And I'm Magrey de Vega.
So Magrey, we're continuing this series, Faith 250, on America's founding documents. And today we're talking about a speech that was given in 1852, I believe, by the abolitionist Frederick Douglass. Yeah. And I looked up the whole speech. I didn't read the whole speech yet, but it's 18 pages. I mean, it's a lengthy speech. I think they say to read it out loud, it would take about 60 minutes.
Yeah.
There are organizations around the country that actually read that speech on a regular basis and have discussion groups about it. But one thing I noticed when I was researching it a little bit is those discussion groups are frequently African-American communities, Black communities. And I was wondering for us, you, me, the majority of our Hyde Park community, right? We're engaging with a document that is sort of testifying to a lived experience that isn't our own, right? So as you preached that sermon, as you thought about the sermon, as you're wanting us to act from that sermon, how do we reconcile that?
That's a great question. We cannot assume that we could understand fully the African-American experience, particularly the enslaved experience. And so we have to resist the temptation to sort of project our own suffering, our own tragedy, to equate it in any kind of way to the atrocity of slavery in this country. At the same time, there are a couple natural gateways to help us connect and empathize. One is to recognize, first of all, that we are all one country. We all have one story to share, and that story is multifaceted. And any attempt, as I say in the sermon, to deny one aspect of experience in that story is to deny the entirety of our full story together. So it's important to hear the stories of enslaved persons. Anybody, frankly, who is experiencing injustice or suffering on the basis of personhood is part of our shared story together. So it's important to hear those stories and to acknowledge them. The second important gateway is to recognize at our core, we are essentially the same, that we are all, in Paul's words, or in the words of our Christian faith, children of God, made in the image of God. And as such, we all have to remember, we're connected to each other as people, as the Declaration says, who are all created equal in these fundamental ways. So suffering against one aspect of our humanity really affects all of us. And so it's important to acknowledge and be aware of those stories. It's also important, and this is where it gets to be very hard, is for all of us to acknowledge our own points of privilege. That even though we can all point to aspects of suffering or persecution that we have gone through personhood, and I've talked about my own racial journey and the ways that I've been subjected to racism, it's also very important to acknowledge our own privilege, the aspects of our life that have been shielded or protected from injustice because of who we are and our lot in life. Acknowledging our privilege is just as important as acknowledging our complicity in that injustice, because it reminds us that we are empowered, that we have agency to make a difference, to work for justice for people who are suffering injustice.
Yeah, I think you name a really important tension there, right? Acknowledging our privilege isn't a stopping point.
Right.
I think sometimes that happens for me and I freeze up and I go, what do I do next? Because, nobody wants to hear from another white guy. Is oftentimes a place where I will stop, right? And what I'm learning and what I'm trying to tell myself is, yes, but you can use your platform or your voice to signal boost other voices.
Absolutely. That's
right?
a great way to say it.
So what's a way that you can have conversations, hear something, and then signal boost that thing that you're hearing, right? That story or that perspective.
Right. So sometimes you can engage in a simple thought experiment. As much as it's important for us to acknowledge the blessings in our lives, and I hope that you all take moments regularly throughout your life to pause and say, I'm grateful for this blessing, this privilege that I have. Go through a simple thought experiment and ask yourself, what if I didn't have this particular privilege or this particular blessing? Like just as an example, I can point to my education.
Sure.
Like I grew up in a school in this country that taught me how to read and to write. I went to a college and then a seminary. What if I didn't have those things for whatever reason? And frankly, I could come up with half a dozen reasons why those basic privileges might not have been afforded to me. What if I didn't have those things? And then go one step further and say, there are likely people in this country who are American like me who did not have those privileges or do not have those privileges. And if that's the case, then how can I hear their story? Not just to make me feel good about myself, that's not the point of all this, but to say, then how can I use my privilege to make sure that the things that I've enjoyed can be shared with other people? Mm-hmm. That's a very difficult act. It goes beyond just empathizing, but using one's agency to help acknowledge that other people don't enjoy the same blessings that I do.
Yeah, that's really important. There was something else that you said in your response, your opening response, about recognizing that we're all the same. Mm-hmm. And I think that can also get thorny, as many of these conversations that we're going to have over the next couple of weeks can get thorny. But that one's thorny too, because, I mean, while yes, the Bible says we're all children of God, and Paul in this Galatians text said there's no longer Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, there are important differences.
Absolutely.
Right? And how do we walk that line of acknowledging what Paul says in Galatians and what Scripture says about being children of God with the truth that we are distinct and different, and those differences matter?
That's right. That's right. A popular alternative for people over the years, and I've fallen for it too, is to think of yourself as colorblind. Like, I don't see color, or I don't see, and then fill in the blank with whatever aspect of personhood. I don't see age, I don't see gender, whatever. That is an altruistic option. I can see the good intent by that, but the reality is all of us are distinct. And there is something about celebrating the uniqueness of every person, but not at the expense of, as I say in the sermon, posing a greater than or less than sort of paradigm. There is a difference between equality and uniformity. We don't all have to be the same in order for us to all be treated the same, if there's a way to distinguish it in that way. I can celebrate the uniqueness of who I am in every aspect, without seeing myself as better than or less than anybody else. And I can do the same with another person, because from a theological perspective, we are all made in God's image, which is why the Imago Dei concept is so foundational to Christian spirituality. So
there's a project I'm working on right now that I think gets at this idea in a very different way. It's not spiritual per se, but it kind of is. You run across this all the time, and I'm working on a parasport model. Okay. So Paralympic sports, right? Yeah. Where the goal is people with disabilities would be able to do a sport. And you have to have a way to make sure that you're grouping people, not by their fitness level or their ability in the sport, but the ability that they are impaired, the amount that they're impaired.
Interesting.
So that it's fair, but then still the fittest person, the most skilled person would win in a fair competition.
Okay.
And I think there's some nuances here, and I haven't quite unpacked this all the way, so I might be just kind of thinking loosely right now, but I think that idea of, because the work of parasport's really hard, of finding the right classifications and putting people into the correct group so that you understand where their impairment is impairing the sport and making it fair.
Right.
But I think the goal there isn't to form equality, right? If it were equality, everybody would be in the same group.
That's right.
Right? And that wouldn't be fair.
Right.
I couldn't compete fairly against somebody who's missing a leg, nor could they compete fairly against me. But with equity, when you get everybody into the right categories, and then I'm competing against people with cerebral palsy, and the person who's missing the leg is competing against people who are also, missing a leg or have issues in their leg, it gets more fair. And I don't know how to put my arms around this, but the parasport work has kind of led me to think a lot about what equity looks like.
Yes.
And what stories look like and privilege looks like, right? So like one thing when I'm talking with athletes is if I don't quite understand something, I always find myself going, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that, because I need to understand what their lived experience is like so that I can understand how they would best fit in this parasport model.
What you're articulating is really helpful. And as you're talking, I'm thinking of a way to maybe frame this as what we're not talking about here is creating a system or a society, or in your case, a sporting event that guarantees equality of outcome, but an equality of opportunity. That's a very important shift here. We're not trying to create a system where everybody turns out the same, or everybody achieves the same, or everybody has the same, or accumulates the same, but everybody has the opportunity for access to exercise their own agency and their own motivation and their own will in order to achieve whatever outcome they can best or most aspire to. I think equality of opportunity is what we talk about with equity in that diversity, equity, inclusion paradigm, but not parity of outcome. We don't all need to wind up the same.
Yeah, I think that's right. We're not looking for homogeny.
Right.
But we're looking for different people to be able to come together and, again, in a sporting environment, be placed where they can have a fair opportunity at competing together.
Right.
And also, honestly, like kind of, well, I don't know, this metaphor is breaking down. So I'm going to pause this here and move to another.
It's just a metaphor.
Yeah, right.
No metaphor is perfect.
So I think this is fun. You guys are seeing us literally think in real time. And if you're listening on the podcast, you're listening to us think through this in real time.
Just a reminder, this is not scripted. None of these Beyond the Sermons are scripted.
That's right. So that's some of the work that I'm doing and kind of thinking through, what these things look like in everyday life and in sport.
Right.
So I want to switch us to another conversation topic. And I realize I'm leaving this one loose, but maybe we'll return to it in future episodes, kind of thing. Another thing that Frederick Douglass talked about was the church and how the church really just kind of wasn't meeting the moment in 1852.
Yeah.
Right. And he calls it out.
Right.
He has some really strong language against the church.
When I first read the entirety of that speech, that was the paragraph that really twisted in my gut the most. And I just know about myself that meant that would have to be a paragraph that I read. Because as I've heard other preachers say, I only preach the sermons I need to hear. And so I needed to hear myself say these words for its own indictment on me, my calling, but also my profession and the institution that I'm called to serve. That the church has been complicit in many ways in the oppression and injustice, not just of African American enslaved people, but all sorts of people throughout its complicated and storied 2,000-year history. It is not a pristine track record when it comes to loving God and loving all.
Right. And so as you were preaching that, I mean, what's the thing that's coming up for you as you're thinking about how the church begins, not atoning for that per se, but kind of just learning from those lessons, I guess?
Yeah. So this formula that I developed for myself as a perspective into this 4-part series really came to the fore when I read that paragraph. In order for us to form a more perfect union, we need to become more perfect in love. And what I find encouraging and challenging about both of those phrases is that it suggests that we are always a work in progress. This whole notion that our greatest days are behind us, or that greatness is something we have to go back to again, is just antithetical to both the Declaration of Independence and as people of grace, particularly sanctifying grace. We were never perfect before, both as spiritual followers of Jesus and as a country. We are always moving on towards something that is closer to the image that God intends for us. So a paragraph like that, as hard as it is to hear about the complicity of the church, is simply a reminder that the church can and must do better, that we never had it right to begin with, not in terms of slavery, not in terms of the equality of women, not in terms of the role of science and faith and reason, not in terms of a whole bunch, not in terms of LGBTQ inclusion. We never had it perfect before, but as we become more perfect in love, we can, as a country, become a more perfect union. Yeah.
I think the scriptural or the biblical image that's coming to mind for me, right, is throughout the Gospels, you don't hear Jesus preaching like, go back. Let's go back to the Garden of Eden, right? Let's go back. His vision for for God's kingdom wasn't a returning back to something.
Yeah.
It was a looking forward
Right.
to a new Jerusalem, a new Garden of Eden, right? Like that's the vision, something new in the future.
Yeah.
Even in the Old Testament, the language is that, let's go back to Egypt, right? It's the people that the prophets are mocking are the ones that are saying, can we go back to Egypt, right? It's forward. There's something ahead of us.
The formal theological term for that, well, there are many, but the one that comes to mind is teleology, the telos, the T-E-L-E-O-S. Go ahead. You got all excited about that. What is
no.
What is teleos?
No. I thought you were going to say something. I thought you might say something else. I just love big words.
Okay, there you go.
Teleology.
Teleos is to be driven by this vision for the culmination of all things, where God is leading us. That's the bigger motivation throughout the scriptures than a return to what was.
Right.
Teleos, which is a Greek word that means end or conclusion or culmination, is really the driving force for much of New Testament theology.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that can be our closing thought. Just this idea that if you as a person, when you think about America or when you think about your own life, if you think the best days were in the past, the biblical image is really saying that like the best days are in the future. And that might be hard to think about sometimes. And sometimes I think the most attentional content today that really grabs people is the stuff that tells you, wasn't it better back then? Wasn't it better in the past? And it idealizes the past. The truth is, the biblical story is one that's telling us to look to the future. So if you find yourself fixating on the past, try and look towards the future and see what that might hold for you and what it might challenge you towards. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Beyond the Sermon. If you want to go deeper with this content, you can find more sermons and Beyond the Sermons on YouTube or on our podcast page or at hydeparkumc.org/next steps. You can join a small group, find out more about our community. I'm Matt Hotho.
I'm Magrey de Vega.
We'll see you next time.